A white mother, Rachel, moves to a new neighborhood with her son Peter, who finds an unexpected twin in Preston, a brave black boy who saves him from bullies. Their bond unravels a shocking family secret that will leave you speechless. What's your guess about their connection? Subscribe to catch our latest heart-tugging tales, share where you're watching from, and comment on your predictions. Will the truth tear them apart or unite them forever? Stick around to find out. You won't want to miss this. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Street, painting the cracked sidewalk in hues of gold and amber. A battered moving truck groaned to a halt in front of a modest brick house, its engine sputtering as if pleading for rest. Rachel Harper stepped out, her blonde curls limp from the day's heat, green eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She clutched a cardboard box labeled kitchen, her knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. Behind her, 6-year-old Peter shuffled down from the passenger seat, his pale cheeks flushed, clutching a worn stuffed dinosaur named Rex. His blue eyes, usually bright, darted nervously around the unfamiliar neighborhood, a small Ohio town far from the life they'd known. Rachel forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "This is home now, Petey," she said, her voice softer than she felt. But Peter didn't answer. He hadn't been himself since the accident. His best friend Tommy had been killed in a car crash, stolen by a rain-slicked road and a careless driver. The loss had gutted Peter, turning her talkative, adventure-loving boy into a ghost of himself. Quiet, withdrawn, his laughter a distant memory. Rachel had uprooted them for a fresh start, hoping this town would mend what grief had broken. But as she watched Peter trudge toward the house, Rex dangling from his hand, doubt gnawed at her. Could anywhere feel like home without Tommy? Inside, the house smelled of dust and old paint. Rachel set the box on the counter, her hands trembling as she unpacked chipped mugs. She glanced at Peter, who sat cross-legged on the bare living room floor, staring at Rex as if the dinosaur held answers. "Want to help unpack, sweetheart?" she asked. He shook his head, barely audible. Rachel's heart sank, but she didn't push. She'd learned that pushing only made him retreat further. The next morning, Rachel walked Peter to the corner of Maple Street, where he'd catch the bus to Lincoln Elementary. His backpack hung heavy on his small shoulders, and his sneakers scuffed the pavement. "You'll make friends, Petey," she said, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Just be you." Peter nodded, but his gaze stayed on the ground. As the yellow bus rumbled away, Rachel stood frozen, a lump in her throat. She whispered a prayer that today would be kind to him, but kindness was scarce in the new neighborhood. That afternoon, as Peter walked home from the bus stop, a group of boys, older, louder, with sneers that cut deeper than words, spotted him. They lounged on a low brick wall, tossing a baseball between them. The leader, a stocky kid with a buzz cut named Danny, grinned like a wolf. "Yo, new kid," he called, hopping down. "What's with the ghost face? You lost or just scared?" The others laughed, closing in like a pack. Peter froze, his heart pounding. He clutched Rex tighter, the dinosaur's worn fabric his only shield. I'm just going home," he stammered, stepping back. Danny snatched Rex from Peter's hands, tossing it to another boy. "What's this, your baby toy?" he taunted. Peter lunged for it, but Danny shoved him, sending him stumbling onto the gravel. Tears stung Peter's eyes, but he bit his lip, refusing to cry. The boys circled closer, their laughter sharp and cruel. Peter's chest tightened. He wanted to run, to scream, but his legs felt like lead. Then a voice sliced through the jeers, clear and fearless. "Back off, Danny, or I'll tell your mom about the candy you stole from Mr. Lee's store." The boys turned, startled. A boy their age stood at the corner, his dark skin gleaming in the sunlight, balancing a wooden tray of candy bars slung around his neck. Preston, known in the neighborhood for selling sweets to help the orphanage where he lived, stared Danny down. His brown eyes were sharp, unyielding, and his stance said he wasn't bluffing. Danny scoffed, tossing Rex to the ground. "Whatever, candy kid. You're not worth it." He jerked his head and the group slunk off, muttering. Preston knelt beside Peter, picking up Rex and brushing off the dirt. "You okay, man?" he asked, his voice softer now, a crooked grin breaking through. "They're all bark, no bite. Stick with me. They won't mess with you again." Peter nodded, his fear easing as he took Rex back. Preston's confidence, his easy kindness, felt like a lifeline. Something about him, maybe the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, reminded Peter of Tommy. Preston held out a candy bar, its wrapper crinkling. "On the house," he said. Peter hesitated, then took it, his fingers brushing Preston's. "Thanks," he whispered, his voice small but steady. Preston shrugged like it was nothing. "What's your name?" he asked. "Peter," he replied, managing a shy smile. "I'm Preston. Come on, I'll walk you home." They fell into step, Peter clutching Rex and the candy bar, Preston's tray bouncing lightly against his chest. For the first time that day, Peter felt safe. When they reached the brick house, Peter turned to Preston. "You're really brave," he said, awe in his voice. Preston laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Nah, just loud. See you tomorrow, Peter." He waved, heading down the street, his tray glinting in the fading light. Peter watched him go, a spark of hope flickering in his chest. Inside, Rachel was stirring a pot of soup, the kitchen warm with the scent of tomatoes and herbs. Peter burst through the door, his eyes brighter than she'd seen in months. "Mom, I met my twin today," he shouted, dropping his backpack with a thud. Rachel turned, startled, a smile tugging at her lips. "Your twin, huh?" she teased, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What's his name?" Peter beamed, climbing onto a stool. "Preston. He's got the same eyes as me, and he's brave, like a superhero. He saved me from some mean kids." Rachel chuckled, ruffling his hair. She assumed it was a childish exaggeration, a fanciful way to describe a new friend. "Tell me more about this, Preston," she said, leaning in. As Peter gushed about Preston, how he'd stood up to Danny, how he'd given him a candy bar, Rachel's heart warmed. She didn't care if Peter's twin was just a story. For the first time since Tommy's death, her son was smiling, his voice alive with excitement. She pulled him into a hug, savoring the moment. "Sounds like a great friend," she said softly. Peter nodded, his eyes shining. "The best." As Rachel tucked Peter into bed that night, his words echoed in her mind. "Twin," he'd called Preston. She smiled, dismissing it as imagination. But deep down, a quiet instinct stirred, a feeling she couldn't name. For now, she pushed it aside, grateful for the boy who'd brought light back to her son's eyes. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. The air in the Harper household carried a new warmth, a flicker of life that hadn't been there since the moving boxes were unpacked. Rachel Harper stood at the kitchen counter, slicing apples for Peter's lunch, the knife's steady rhythm a quiet comfort. Her son's voice, once silenced by grief, now filled the small brick house with stories of his new friend, Preston. The boy who'd saved him from bullies had become a daily fixture in Peter's world, and Rachel couldn't help but feel a cautious hope. She hummed softly, the scent of apples mingling with the morning light streaming through the window. Peter bounded into the kitchen, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his stuffed dinosaur Rex tucked under his arm. "Mom, can I bring an extra apple for Preston?" he asked, his blue eyes wide with earnestness. "He's my best friend now." Rachel's heart lifted at the words. She hadn't heard Peter call anyone a best friend since Tommy's death had stolen his spark. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, slipping another apple into his lunchbox. She didn't press for details, content to see her son's smile return. But as Peter chattered about Preston, how they'd raced to the end of the street, how Preston always shared his candy, Rachel's curiosity grew. Who was this boy who'd so quickly filled the void in her son's heart? After Peter left for the bus, Rachel tidied the kitchen, her mind drifting to Preston. She pictured a scrappy kid, maybe a little rough around the edges, selling candy to get by. Peter's stories painted him as a hero, but Rachel wanted to know more. She decided to visit the neighborhood store, Mr. Lee's Corner Market, where Preston often sold his sweets. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of fresh bread and cleaning supplies. Mr. Lee, a wiry man with kind eyes, looked up from the counter. "Morning, Rachel. Settling in okay?" he asked, wiping his hands on an apron. "Getting there," she replied, scanning the shelves for an excuse to linger. "I hear a boy named Preston sells candy around here. My son's taken a shine to him." Mr. Lee's face softened. "Preston's a good kid. Lives at St. Mary's Orphanage down the road. Been selling candy since he could walk. Helps keep the place running. No family, though. Poor thing was left at the doorstep as a baby. Rachel's chest tightened. An orphan? She imagined Preston's small frame, his tray of candy, and felt a pang of sympathy. He's tough, though, Mr. Lee added, chuckling. Got a mouth on him when the older kids try to mess with him. Rachel nodded, her thoughts swirling as she bought a loaf of bread and left. On the walk home, she couldn't shake the image of Preston, alone in the world yet brave enough to stand up for her son. She decided to keep an eye out for him, maybe thank him for being Peter's friend. That afternoon, she drove to the edge of Maple Street, where Peter had said he and Preston liked to hang out. She parked near a towering oak tree, its branches sprawling like a protective canopy over the sidewalk. There, in the dappled shade, she saw them. Peter and another boy, their laughter carried on the breeze. Peter was crouched, drawing in the dirt with a stick, his blonde hair catching the sunlight. Beside him, a boy with dark skin and tight curls tossed a pebble, his movements quick and confident. That must be Preston, Rachel thought, leaning forward in her seat. She squinted, studying him. His smile was wide, infectious, and the way he tilted his head as he teased Peter was oddly familiar. Her breath caught. It wasn't just their laughter or the ease between them. Preston's gestures, the way he rubbed his neck when he laughed, mirrored Peter's in a way that sent a chill down her spine. Rachel shook her head, dismissing the thought. Kids pick up each other's habits, she told herself. But as she watched them wrestle playfully, Preston letting Peter pin him down before flipping him over with a grin, her unease deepened. They didn't look alike. Peter's pale skin and blue eyes contrasted sharply with Preston's warm brown skin and dark curls, but their mannerisms were like reflections in a warped mirror. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. Was she imagining it? She started the car and drove home, the oak tree shrinking in her rearview mirror, but the image of the boy stayed with her. That evening, as Rachel set the table for dinner, Peter burst through the door, his cheeks flushed from running. Preston showed me how to make a slingshot today, he said, dropping his backpack. He's so cool, Mom. He says we're like twins, 'cause we both love dinosaurs. Rachel smiled, but her mind raced. Twins. Peter had been calling Preston that since their first meeting, and now she couldn't unsee the similarities. She sat across from him at dinner, watching him shovel spaghetti into his mouth, his eyes bright with stories. Preston's gonna teach me to climb the oak tree tomorrow, he said between bites. He's not scared of anything. Rachel nodded, her fork pausing midair. He sounds special, she said carefully. Have you met his parents? Peter shook his head. He doesn't have any. He lives at the orphanage. But he's okay, Mom. He's got me now. Rachel's throat tightened. She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. I'm glad you've got each other, she said, her voice thick. After Peter went to bed, Rachel sat on the couch, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. She couldn't stop thinking about Preston, his courage, his loneliness, the eerie way he echoed her son. She grabbed her phone and dialed her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, a chatty widow who knew everyone's business. Preston, the candy boy? Mrs. Jenkins said. Sweet kid, but no one knows much about him. Found on the orphanage steps, wrapped in a blanket. No note, no nothing. Rachel thanked her, hanging up with a sinking feeling. Preston was a mystery, a boy without a past, yet he felt like a piece of her world. She stood and paced the living room, her reflection flickering in the dark window. The similarities between Peter and Preston nagged at her, a puzzle she couldn't solve. Was it just their friendship or something deeper? She thought of her late husband, Michael, his warm smile and the secrets he'd taken to his grave. A flicker of doubt crossed her mind, but she pushed it away. Not now, she told herself. She climbed the stairs to Peter's room, pausing at his door. He slept soundly, Rex tucked under his arm, a faint smile on his lips. Rachel's heart swelled. Whatever Preston was to Peter, he'd brought her son back to life. For that she was grateful. But the mystery of the boy under the oak tree lingered, a shadow she couldn't shake. The small brick house on Maple Street was quiet, save for the faint clinking of dishes as Rachel Harper washed the supper plates. The kitchen glowed under the soft light of a single bulb, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Rachel's hands moved mechanically, scrubbing a pot, but her mind was elsewhere, caught in the image of two boys under an oak tree, their laughter entwined like threads of a forgotten song. Peter's stories about Preston had become a daily ritual, each one painting the orphan boy as a hero, a twin. But the similarities Rachel had noticed, the way Preston's gestures mirrored her son's, had rooted a restless curiosity in her chest. Tonight it bloomed into something sharper, a need to understand. She dried her hands on a dish towel, her green eyes flicking to the living room where Peter sprawled on the couch, sketching dinosaurs in a notebook. His pencil scratched furiously, his blonde hair falling across his forehead. "Petey," she called softly, "tell me more about Preston's slingshot trick." Peter's face lit up, his blue eyes sparkling. "He showed me how to aim at a tin can. He's so good, Mom, like he knows everything." Rachel smiled, but her pulse quickened. The way Peter described Preston's confidence, his quick grin, it was like hearing her son describe himself. She sat beside him, tucking a strand of hair behind his ear. "You two sound like quite a pair," she said, her voice light but probing. "What else makes him your twin?" Peter tilted his head, the same gesture she'd seen from Preston under the oak. "He laughs like me, and he loves chocolate bars, and he's not scared of bullies. It's like he's me, but different." Rachel's breath hitched. She forced a chuckle, ruffling his hair. "Sounds like a keeper." But as Peter returned to his drawing, her smile faded. The word twin echoed, a puzzle piece that didn't fit. The next morning, Rachel walked Peter to the bus stop, her eyes scanning the street for Preston. She hadn't seen him since that day by the oak, but his presence lingered in her thoughts like a half-remembered dream. As the bus pulled away, she headed to the library, a squat building at the edge of town. If Preston was a mystery, she'd start with what little she knew. He was an orphan, left at St. Mary's as a baby. The library's cool air greeted her, the scent of old paper calming her nerves. She approached the librarian, Mrs. Carver, a woman with wire-rimmed glasses and a knack for local gossip. "Morning, Rachel," Mrs. Carver said, peering over her desk. "What brings you in?" Rachel hesitated, then leaned in. "I'm looking for anything about St. Mary's orphanage. A boy named Preston lives there, my son's friend. I just want to know more about him." Mrs. Carver's eyes softened. "That Candy boy? Sweet child, but a sad story. Hold on." She shuffled to a back room, returning with a thin file of newspaper clippings. "Not much, but this mentions the orphanage." Rachel sat at a wooden table. The clippings spread before her. A faded article described a baby found on the St. Mary's steps, wrapped in a blue blanket, no note or name. The child, estimated to be a newborn, was taken in by the orphanage staff, it read. "No family has come forward." Rachel's fingers traced the words, her heart sinking. Preston had been abandoned, left to a world that didn't claim him. But nothing in the article explained why he felt so familiar, why his mannerisms echoed Peter's like a shadow. She thanked Mrs. Carver and left, the clippings weight heavy in her mind. On the drive home, she passed the oak tree, its branches swaying in the breeze. She imagined Peter and Preston there, their laughter a defiant song against the world's cruelty. The image stirred something deep, a memory of her late husband, Michael. His laugh, the way he'd rub his neck when nervous. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. Was she seeing Michael and Preston, or was it just her grief playing tricks? That afternoon, Rachel couldn't resist. She drove to Maple Street's edge, parking across from the oak tree. The school bus had just dropped off its passengers, and there they were. Peter and Preston crouched in the dirt, tossing pebbles at a makeshift target. Peter's blonde hair glinted, his giggle sharp and bright. Preston, his dark curls bouncing, mimicked Peter's stance, his grin a perfect match. Rachel's breath caught. It wasn't just their laughter or the way they moved in sync. It was the small things, the way Preston squinted one eye to aim, the same way Peter did when drawing, the way he tucked his chin when deep in thought, a habit Peter had since he was 3. Her heart pounded, a mix of awe and unease. She gripped the door handle, tempted to step out, to see Preston up close, to ask him, "What? Who are you? Why do you feel like mine?" But she stayed put, watching as Preston handed Peter a candy bar, their hands brushing with easy trust. The boys sat against the tree, shoulders touching, their chatter a soft hum she couldn't hear. Rachel's eyes stung. They were so alike, yet so different. Peter's pale skin a stark contrast to Preston's warm brown. Yet in that moment, they were one, bound by something she couldn't name. She drove home, her thoughts a storm. That evening, as Peter helped set the table, she watched him closely. He hummed a tune, his movements quick and sure, just like Preston's. "Mom, can Preston come over sometime?" he asked, stacking plates. Rachel paused, her hand on a glass. "Maybe," she said, her voice tight. "I'd like to meet him." Peter beamed, oblivious to her tension. "You'll love him, Mom. He's the best." After Peter went to bed, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of tea before her. She pulled out a photo of Michael, his face frozen in a smile. He'd been her anchor, her love, until his death left her adrift. But their marriage hadn't been perfect. Late nights, unexplained absences. She'd buried those memories, but now they clawed their way back. Could Preston be tied to Michael? The thought was absurd, yet it clung to her, a whisper of truth she wasn't ready to face. She stood, pacing the dim kitchen, the floor creaking under her steps. Preston was an orphan, a boy with no past, yet he carried pieces of her son, or was it Michael, in every gesture. She stopped, staring out the window into the dark. The oak tree was out there, somewhere, holding the boy's secrets. Rachel's chest tightened. She didn't have answers, but the resemblance was no coincidence. Something bound Peter and Preston, a thread she was only beginning to unravel. For now she'd watch, wait, and protect the light Preston had brought back to her son's eyes. But the mystery was alive, and it was calling her name. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint creak of the attic floorboards under Rachel Harper's weight. She knelt before an old cedar chest, its hinges rusted from disuse, her hands trembling as she lifted the lid. The air smelled of mothballs and forgotten years, and the dim glow of a single bulb cast jagged shadows across the cluttered space. Rachel's heart pounded, a drumbeat of dread and determination. The uncanny resemblance between her son, Peter, and his friend Preston had burrowed into her mind, a splinter she couldn't ignore. Tonight she was searching for answers, answers she feared might unravel the life she'd built. She sifted through the chest's contents, faded baby clothes, Peter's first drawings, a cracked photo frame. Then her fingers brushed a bundle of envelopes tied with twine, hidden beneath a folded quilt. Her breath caught. These were Michael's letters, ones she'd never opened after his death, too raw with grief to face his words. She untied the bundle, her hands unsteady, and pulled out a single envelope. The handwriting wasn't Michael's. It was feminine, precise, and addressed to him at an old P.O. box. The return address read, Denise Coleman, a name that struck no chord but sent a chill down Rachel's spine. She tore it open, the paper crisp despite its age. The letter was brief, its words a blade. "Michael, you can't ignore this. I'm pregnant. I need your help, but I can't do this alone. Please." Rachel's vision blurred, the attic spinning. Pregnant. The word echoed, a betrayal she'd never suspected. Michael, her anchor, her love, had kept secrets. She read the letter again, then another from Denise, each one more desperate. "I don't have the money to raise a child," the last one said. "If you won't help, I'll have no choice." Rachel's hands shook as she set the letters down, her mind racing. Could Preston, the boy who called Peter his twin, be Denise's child? She stumbled downstairs, the letters clutched to her chest, and sank onto the couch. The house was still, Peter asleep upstairs, oblivious to the storm brewing in his mother's heart. Rachel stared at a photo of Michael on the mantel, his smile now a stranger's. She'd buried the cracks in their marriage, his late nights, his vague excuses, because his death had sanctified him in her memory. But now the truth clawed free. She needed to know if Preston was Michael's son, if the boy who'd saved Peter was tied to her by blood and betrayal. The next morning, Rachel moved with purpose, her exhaustion masked by resolve. She called a private investigator, a man named Frank Callahan, recommended by a friend for his discretion. Over coffee at a diner, she slid the letters across the table, her voice low. "I need you to find Denise Coleman," she said, "and confirm if her child is Preston, The boy from St. Mary's orphanage. I need to know if he's my husband's. Callahan, a grizzled man with sharp eyes, nodded. I'll dig. But prepare yourself, Mrs. Harper. Truth like this doesn't always sit easily. Rachel swallowed, her throat tight. Just find it. Days bled into nights, each one taut with anticipation. Rachel went through the motions, cooking for Peter, driving him to the bus stop, but her thoughts were with Callahan's search. She avoided the oak tree, unable to face Preston's smile, his gestures that echoed Michael's. Peter noticed her distance, his brow furrowing one evening as he set the table. Mom, are you mad at me? He asked, his voice small. Rachel forced a smile, pulling him into a hug. Never, Petey, just tired. But her heart ached. She was protecting him, or so she told herself, from a truth that might shatter his world. A week later, Callahan called. Meet me at the diner, he said, his tone clipped. Rachel's stomach churned as she drove, the letters tucked in her purse like a guilty secret. Callahan was already there, a manila folder on the table. He didn't waste words. Denise Coleman, black woman, lived in a nearby city, gave birth to a boy, same age as your son. Couldn't afford to keep him, left him at St. Mary's. No father listed, but orphanage records had DNA for unclaimed kids. He slid a report across. It matches Michael Harper's profile, pulled from an old medical record. Preston's his son. Rachel's world tilted. She stared at the report, the words blurring. Michael's son. Preston was Peter's half-brother, abandoned by a father who'd chosen silence. Her chest tightened, anger and grief colliding. You're sure? She whispered. Callahan nodded. As sure as science gets. He left her with the folder, his footsteps fading, as Rachel sat frozen, the diner's hum distant. She pictured Preston, his courage, his kindness, his loneliness, and tears spilled down her cheeks. Michael's betrayal stung, but Preston was innocent, a child left to fend for himself. She drove home, the folder burning a hole in her purse. That night she sat at the kitchen table, the letters and reports spread before her. Peter's laughter from the living room, where he played with Rex, felt like a lifeline. She thought of Preston, selling candy to survive, yet finding room in his heart to protect her son. He deserved better than the hand he'd been dealt. Rachel's fingers traced Denise's words. I'll have no choice. She understood that desperation, the weight of a mother's love. Denise had let Preston go to save him. Could Rachel do less? She stood, resolve hardening. She wouldn't tell Peter, not yet. The truth was too heavy for a child. But she could give Preston a home, a family. She called St. Mary's orphanage, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'd like to talk about fostering a boy named Preston, she said to the director. He's important to my son. The director's voice was warm, promising to start the process. Rachel hung up, her hands trembling, but her mind clear. She'd face Michael's ghost later. For now, she'd be a mother to a boy who needed one. As she climbed the stairs to check on Peter, Rachel paused, the folder still in her hand. She imagined Preston's grin, so like Peter's, and felt a flicker of hope. The secret was hers to carry, a burden she'd bear to protect them both. But under the oak tree, two boys had found each other, and Rachel would make sure they'd never be torn apart. The truth was out, but the story was far from over. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the Harper house, casting delicate patterns across the hardwood floor. Rachel Harper stood in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, her green eyes fixed on the backyard where Peter kicked a soccer ball against the fence. His laughter, bright and unburdened, was a melody she'd feared she'd never hear again. Yet beneath her relief, a secret pulse like a hidden wound. The truth about Preston, Peter's half-brother, now poised to join their home. Rachel's decision to foster the boy was firm, but her heart trembled with the weight of the lie she'd chosen to carry. She set the mug down, her fingers lingering on its warmth, and glanced at the stack of fostering paperwork on the counter. The process had been grueling, home visits, interviews, endless forms, but today Preston would arrive. Rachel had told Peter only that Preston, his best friend, needed a home, and they'd be his family. The truth that Preston was his father's son was locked away, too raw for a child's heart. She adjusted a framed photo of Peter on the fridge, her resolve hardening. She'd protect them both, no matter the cost. The doorbell chimed, sharp and sudden, jolting Rachel from her thoughts. She smoothed her blouse, her pulse quickening, and opened the door. There stood Preston, his dark curls tousled, his candy tray replaced by a worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Beside him was Ms. Larson, the orphanage director, her smile kind but professional. Preston's brown eyes met Rachel's, wary yet hopeful, a flicker of the courage that had first drawn Peter to him. "Hi, Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice soft but steady. Rachel's throat tightened. "Welcome, Preston," she said, stepping aside. "Come on in." Peter burst from the living room, his sneakers squeaking on the floor. "Preston!" he shouted, tackling him in a hug that nearly knocked the duffel bag to the ground. Preston laughed, a sound so like Peter's it sent a shiver down Rachel. "Easy, man," he said, ruffling Peter's blonde hair. Ms. Larson handed Rachel a folder of final documents, her voice low. "He's a good boy. You're doing a wonderful thing." Rachel nodded, her smile tight. "Thank you. We'll take care of him." As Ms. Larson left, Rachel closed the door, the click sealing their new reality. She led Preston to a small bedroom upstairs, its walls freshly painted blue, a twin bed neatly made. "This is yours," she said, watching his reaction. Preston set his bag down, his fingers tracing the edge of the bed, his expression unreadable. "Never had my room before," he murmured, almost to himself. Peter bounced on his heels. "It's right next to mine. We can build a fort." Preston's grin broke through, and Rachel's chest loosened. For now they were just boys, untouched by the shadows of their shared blood. The first days were a dance of adjustment. Rachel enrolled Preston in Lincoln Elementary, where he joined Peter's class. She bought him clothes, a backpack, and a new pair of sneakers, each purchase a quiet vow to give him what he'd never had. At the store, Preston hesitated, clutching a cheap t-shirt. "You sure this is okay?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Rachel knelt, meeting his gaze. "You're part of this family now, Preston. It's more than okay." His shy smile was a victory, small but profound. At home, the boys were inseparable. They sprawled on the living room floor, sketching superheroes, their pencils scratching in unison. Rachel watched from the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, her heart swelling at their chatter. "You draw the cape, I'll do the mask," Preston said, nudging Peter. "We're going to make the best hero ever." Peter nodded, his tongue poking out in concentration. Their synergy was effortless, a mirror of spirit if not of skin. Yet Rachel's gaze lingered on Preston, his quick laugh, the way he tilted his head, echoes of Michael that pierced her anew. One evening, as she tucked Peter into bed, he grabbed her hand. "Mom, is Preston gonna stay forever?" His blue eyes were wide, vulnerable. Rachel's breath caught. "As long as he needs us," she said, kissing his forehead. She crossed the hall to Preston's room, where he sat cross-legged on the bed, reading a comic book. "You settling in okay?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. He nodded, his curls bouncing. "Yeah, Peter's awesome. And thanks, Mrs. Harper, for all this." Rachel's eyes stung. "You're welcome, Preston. Get some sleep." She closed the door, her heart heavy with the secret she kept. Nights were harder. Alone in her room, Rachel wrestled with guilt. She'd welcomed Preston, but the truth, his father's betrayal, his abandonment, loomed like a specter. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining Michael's face, his voice. Had he known about Preston? Had he chosen to leave him behind? The questions gnawed, but she pushed them down, focusing on the boys' laughter, their footsteps thundering through the house. She was their mother now, both of them, and that was enough. One afternoon, Rachel found the boys in the backyard, building a makeshift fort from old blankets and chairs. Preston was directing, his hands on his hips, while Peter draped a sheet over a branch. "It's gotta be taller, like a castle," Preston said, his grin infectious. Peter laughed, mimicking his stance. Rachel watched from the porch, a glass of iced tea in hand, her chest tight with love and fear. They were so alike, not in looks, but in soul, and she wondered how long she could shield them from the truth. As the sun dipped low, casting the fort in golden light, Preston caught her eye and waved. "Mrs. Harper, come check it out," he called. Rachel set her glass down and joined them, crawling into the fort's cozy interior. The boys beamed, their faces flushed with pride. "It's our headquarters," Peter said, "for me and my twin." Preston nodded, his arm slung around Peter's shoulder. Rachel's smile wavered, but she nodded. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick. In that moment, under the blanket roof, they were a family, fragile, but real. She stood, brushing grass from her jeans, and returned to the house, the boys' laughter following her. The fostering papers sat on the counter, a reminder of her commitment. Rachel touched them, her fingers steady. She'd made a choice, to love Preston, to raise him as her own, despite the pain of Michael's secrets. The truth could wait, buried deep for now. But as she glanced out the window, where the boys plotted their next adventure, she knew this family, born of chance and courage, was worth every sacrifice. The oak tree stood in the distance, a silent witness, and Rachel felt its roots entwined with her own. The skyline of the small Ohio town shimmered under a twilight haze, its modest buildings dwarfed by the sleek glass tower that housed Harper and Hayes, a renewable energy startup that had become the talk of the region. Inside the top-floor office, Peter Harper leaned over a blueprint, his blonde hair now neatly trimmed, his blue eyes sharp with focus. At 26, he was no longer the timid boy from Maple Street, but a man whose quiet determination drove the company's vision. Across the desk, Preston Hayes, his dark curls flecked with early gray, scribbled notes, his quick grin unchanged from their childhood under the oak tree. Together, they were an unstoppable force, their bond forging a legacy that neither could have imagined as boys. The office hummed with the energy of late-night work, laptops glowing, coffee cups scattered, the faint buzz of a prototype solar panel in the corner. Peter tapped the blueprint, his voice steady. "If we adjust the panel's angle here, we can boost efficiency by 10%. Preston nodded, his pen pausing. "Brilliant, but we'll need to tweak the battery storage to handle the extra load. I'll run the numbers." Their synergy was seamless, a dance of ideas honed over years of dreaming together. Harper and Hayes wasn't just a company, it was a testament to their shared spirit. A beacon of innovation born from two boys who'd once built forts from blankets. Rachel Harper watched from the doorway, her heart swelling with pride. Now in her 50s, her blonde curls streaked with silver, she carried the weight of her secret, Preston's true parentage, like a stone in her chest. She'd raised the boys as brothers, shielding them from the truth of Michael's betrayal, and their success felt like her vindication. She knocked lightly, holding a takeout bag. "You two ever stop to eat?" she teased, setting the bag on the desk. Peter grinned, grabbing a sandwich. "Only when you make us, Mom." Preston laughed, his arm slung around Peter's shoulder, a gesture so familiar it ached. "You're a lifesaver, Mrs. Harper." She sat, watching them banter, their laughter a bridge to their childhood. Harper and Hayes had grown from a garage project, sketched on napkins under the oak tree, to a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Their solar technology was revolutionizing rural communities, and investors were circling, drawn by the brothers' reputation for integrity and innovation. But Rachel saw more than their accolades. She saw Peter's quiet resolve, Preston's bold charisma, and the unspoken trust that bound them. Yet the secret gnawed at her. Would their empire withstand the truth? The office door swung open, and Lila, their sharp-witted COO, strode in, her tablet glowing. "Good news," she said, her voice clipped with excitement. "The state just approved our bid for the rural electrification project. We're looking at 100 new installations." Peter's eyes lit up, and Preston pumped a fist. "That's huge," he said, high-fiving Peter. Rachel clapped, her smile genuine but tinged with unease. Success meant scrutiny, and scrutiny could unearth secrets. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the boys' triumph. As Lila left, Peter unrolled another blueprint, his focus unrelenting. "This project could change everything," he said, his voice low but fervent. "Clean energy for people who've never had it." Preston nodded, his eyes gleaming. "It's what we dreamed of, man. Making a difference." Rachel's throat tightened. She remembered their childhood dreams, superheroes saving the world, now made real through grit and genius. But the weight of her silence pressed harder. She stood, brushing imaginary lint from her skirt. "I'll let you two get back to it," she said, her voice softer than intended. That night Rachel drove home, the town's lights blurring past her window. The boys had insisted she move to a larger house years ago, a cozy place with a garden, but she still felt the pull of the old brick house on Maple Street. She parked, her hands lingering on the steering wheel, and closed her eyes. Images of Peter and Preston flashed, building forts, racing to the oak tree, now leading a company that lit up lives. She'd given them this life, but at what cost? The truth about Preston's father, Michael, was a shadow she'd buried, but it loomed larger with their growing fame. At home, she poured a glass of wine, the kitchen quiet save for the hum of the fridge. She opened a photo album, its pages worn from years of turning. There they were, Peter and Preston at 10, grinning under the oak tree, their arms slung around each other. Their differences, Peter's pale skin, Preston's dark curls, were stark, but their spirits were one. She traced their faces, her fingers trembling. She'd fostered Preston to save him, to give Peter a brother, but the lie felt heavier now, a betrayal of the trust they'd built. The phone rang, startling her. It was Preston, his voice warm through the static. "Mrs. Harper, you left your scarf at the office. Want me to drop it off tomorrow?" Rachel smiled, her heart easing. "That'd be great, Preston. You boys working late again?" He laughed. "Always. Peter's got us dreaming bigger every day." She hung up, the sound of his laugh, so like Peter's, so like Michael's, lingering. She sipped her wine, staring at the album. The boys were her world, and their success was her pride. But the secret was a fault line beneath it all. She stood, pacing the kitchen, the floor cool under her bare feet. Harper and Hayes was their triumph, a shared dream made real, but Rachel knew dreams could fracture. She imagined the headlines if the truth surfaced. Michael's affair, Preston's abandonment. Would the boys survive it? She stopped, her reflection in the window a ghostly outline. She'd protected them this long, and she'd keep protecting them, no matter the cost. The oak tree stood somewhere in the night, its roots deep, like the bond between her sons. Rachel closed the album, her resolve firm. For now, their triumph was enough, a light against the gathering shadows. The attic of Rachel Harper's new home was a maze of shadows, its air thick with the scent of dust and old wood. Preston Hayes, now 26, knelt beside a cardboard box, his dark curls catching the faint glow of a flashlight. He'd offered to help Rachel sort through her belongings for her move to a smaller house, a task that felt like excavating a life. Peter was downstairs sorting books, his laughter drifting up through the floorboards. But up here, alone, Preston's hands stilled as he uncovered a locked metal box tucked beneath a pile of faded quilts. Curiosity, sharp and insistent, urged him to pry it open. The lock was flimsy, yielding to a screwdriver with a soft click. Inside lay a bundle of envelopes and a folded document, yellowed with age. Preston's brow furrowed as he pulled out a letter, its handwriting unfamiliar but precise. "Michael, you can't ignore this. I'm pregnant," it began. His breath caught. Michael, Rachel's late husband, Peter's father. He scanned the letter, then another, each one from a woman named Denise, pleading for help with a child she couldn't raise. His hands trembled as he unfolded the document, a private investigator's report. Words leaped out. DNA match, Michael Harper, Preston Hayes, St. Mary's Orphanage. The truth hit like a fist. He was Michael's son, Peter's half-brother. Preston sat back, the attic spinning. His life, selling candy, surviving the orphanage, finding a home with Rachel, flashed before him, now reframed by betrayal. Michael had abandoned him, and Rachel had known. The letters, the report, were proof she'd hidden the truth, raising him as a foster son while carrying this secret. Anger surged hot and raw, but beneath it lay a deeper hurt. Why hadn't she told him? He clutched the papers, his heart pounding, and descended the stairs, each step heavier than the last. In the living room, Peter was stacking books, his blonde hair mussed, oblivious to the storm brewing. Rachel sat on the couch, sipping tea, her silver-streaked curls framing a face lined with quiet pride. Preston stopped in the doorway, the papers a burning weight in his hand. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice low but steady, "we need to talk." Rachel's eyes flicked to the papers, and her cup froze midair. A flicker of fear crossed her face, quickly masked. Peter looked up, sensing the tension. "What's up, Press?" he asked, but Preston kept his gaze on Rachel. She set her cup down, her hands trembling slightly. "Peter, can you give us a minute?" she said, her voice calm but strained. Peter hesitated, then nodded, grabbing a book and heading to the kitchen. The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken truths. Preston stepped forward, laying the letters and report on the coffee table. "I found these," he said, his voice taut. "You knew I was Michael's son. You knew I was Peter's brother. Why didn't you tell me?" Rachel's face crumpled, her green eyes glistening. She stood, her hands clasped as if to steady herself. "Preston, she faltered, her voice breaking. "I wanted to protect you. Both of you." Preston's jaw tightened, his hurt spilling over. "Protect me? From what? Knowing my own father left me on a doorstep? That you lied to me all these years?" His voice rose, raw with pain, but he caught himself, glancing toward the kitchen where Peter lingered. He lowered his tone. "I deserved to know." Rachel sank onto the couch, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You did," she whispered. "But when I found out, you were just a boy, so full of light despite everything. I couldn't bear to hurt you with Michael's mistakes." She reached for the letters, her fingers brushing the paper. "I loved you from the moment you came into our home. You were my son, Preston, not just a foster child. Telling you meant risking that, risking you and Peter." Preston paced, his sneakers scuffing the rug. He thought of the oak tree, their childhood laughter, the empire they'd built with Harper and Hayes. It was all real, yet tainted by this hidden truth. "Did you think I'd hate you?" he asked, his voice softer now, searching. "Or Peter? He's my brother, blood or not. You should have trusted us." Rachel wiped her eyes, her voice steadying. "I was scared. Michael's betrayal broke me. But you and Peter, you healed me. I couldn't lose you." He stopped, his gaze falling on the photo on the mantel. Him and Peter at 10, grinning under the oak tree. The memory softened his anger, but the hurt lingered. "You gave me a life," he said, his voice thick. "A family. But this, it changes things." Rachel stood, stepping closer, her eyes pleading. "You're still my son, Preston. Nothing changes that. I kept the truth to give you a home, not to hurt you." She reached out, but he stepped back, not ready for her touch. The kitchen door creaked, and Peter peered in, his brow furrowed. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice small. Preston forced a smile, his heart aching. "Yeah, man, just talking." Peter nodded, but his eyes lingered, sensing the weight in the room. Rachel took a shaky breath. "Preston, we can tell him together when you're ready, or never. It's your choice." Preston looked at her, the woman who'd raised him, loved him despite his father's sins. His anger ebbed, replaced by a weary gratitude. He picked up the report, folding it carefully. "I need time," he said, his voice low. "But thank you for choosing me." Rachel's tears fell freely now, and she nodded, her lips trembling. Preston turned, heading for the door, needing air, needing the oak tree's quiet strength. As he stepped into the night, the papers in his hand, he felt the weight of his past and the promise of his future. Rachel had hidden the truth, but she'd given him everything else. The revelation was a wound, but it was also a bridge. To Peter, to the family they'd forged, to the man he'd become. Wow, what a journey with Peter, Preston, and Rachel. What did their story stir in you? Would you have made the same choices as Rachel? Drop your thoughts in the comments and share where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. A huge thank you for joining us. Your support means the world. Subscribe to catch our next heartwarming tale, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay inspired, and we'll see you soon.